You wouldn't believe me if I told you she was 74. The first time I saw her, I thought she was maybe in her late 40s, radiant, confident, and with a spark that outshone the crowd around her. But it wasn't her age-defying beauty that caught my attention. It was her energy, something magnetic, almost alive. The way she carried herself, the way her laughter seemed to wrap itself around everyone within reach, it felt like time had simply decided to stop for her. She leaned on the cafe counter, chatting with the young barista, and when she caught me staring, she smiled, not with vanity, but with knowing. "Don't look so surprised," she said. "I wasn't always like this." That was how it began, a story that would change how I thought about aging, love, and what it really means to stay alive long after the world expects you to fade. She invited me to sit with her, said she had a story to tell, one I'd want to hear, and that if I listened till the end, I'd understand why she was, as she put it, hotter than ever at 74. Her name was Evelyn Grace, a name that already sounded like a secret whispered by time. She had once been everything society told women to be. Beautiful, polite, selfless, married to a man who gave her stability but never really saw her. For decades, she lived in that quiet prison of shoulds and musts. She was the perfect wife, the doting mother, the supportive friend. Her life looked like contentment from the outside. Sunday dinners, photo albums, a garden filled with roses. But inside she was wilting. Evelyn told me about the day she realized her reflection had become a stranger. It was her 61st birthday. Her husband had passed 3 years earlier, her children had moved away, and she'd just retired from teaching. That morning, as she stood before the mirror, she didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her eyes looked dull, her skin tired, her smile forced. "I had spent my life being everything for everyone else," she said, "and somewhere in the middle of that, I forgot to beam." That day, she decided she was done living quietly. She sold her house, the same house she'd lived in for 40 years, and moved into a small apartment by the ocean. Everyone thought she'd lost her mind. "At your age?" they said. But Evelyn only smiled. She wanted to know who she was when no one needed her. The first few months were awkward. She didn't know what to do with herself. She'd walk along the boardwalk and watch younger people laugh and dance, wondering if she'd ever feel that alive again. Then, one evening, she saw an older woman around her age painting by the shore. She was barefoot, wild-haired, splattered in color, and completely radiant. Evelyn watched her for a while before finally gathering the courage to say hello. The woman looked up and grinned. "You're late," she said. Evelyn blinked, confused. "Late for what?" The woman dipped her brush in red paint and said, "Late to start living." That night changed everything. Evelyn bought herself a cheap set of paints the next day. She began painting on her balcony, terrible at first, but joyful. She started dancing in her living room again, the way she used to when she was 20 and unbroken. She signed up for yoga, began swimming at dawn, learned how to cook the meals she loved instead of the ones others expected. Slowly, the light came back into her eyes. At 65, she started traveling alone. Her first trip was to Italy. She laughed as she told me how terrified she was, sitting in that little hotel in Florence with her phrase book and her trembling hands. But by the end of that week, she'd made friends with local artists, shared wine with strangers, and found herself sketching on cobblestone streets. "I realized then," she said, "that youth isn't about smooth skin or quick steps. It's about curiosity. It's about saying yes when everything in you wants to stay safe." She began taking care of her body, not because she wanted to fight age, but because she wanted to honor it. She started walking daily, eating clean, meditating. She fell in love with movement again, and people noticed. At 70, she looked more alive than she had at 50. Her hair silvered, but she wore it proudly, long and free. Her wrinkles softened into lines of laughter and sunlight. Then came the part of her story that silenced me. When Evelyn turned 71, she met someone. His name was Samuel. He was 59, a photographer who had come to her art class for inspiration. At first, she tried to ignore what she felt. It felt ridiculous, she admitted. What business did I have catching feelings at 71? Society doesn't like women my age being desired. It makes them uncomfortable. But Samuel saw her in a way she hadn't been seen in decades. He admired her passion, her laughter, her boldness. He called her his muse of fire. She hesitated for months before letting him in, but when she did, it wasn't just romance, it was liberation. "He didn't make me young again," she said softly. "He made me realize I'd never stopped being young." They traveled together, photographed sunsets, and spent nights talking about everything, their regrets, their dreams, their fears. Samuel didn't see her as 74. He saw her as Evelyn, the woman who burned brighter than anyone he'd ever met. And in loving him, Evelyn learned the most powerful truth of all, that attraction, beauty, and vitality aren't trapped in time. They're born from how fiercely you live. One afternoon, as we sat in that same cafe months later, she leaned forward and whispered, "Everyone keeps asking me my secret. They think it's my diet or my skincare or some magic ritual, but the truth is simpler." She smiled, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "I stopped trying to stay young. I started trying to stay alive. That's what made me hotter than ever." As she stood to leave, I asked her where she was going. She winked. "To dance," she said. "You coming?" And maybe, just maybe, that was her real secret. Not youth, not beauty, but freedom. The kind of freedom that comes when you stop fearing time and start embracing yourself completely. Because Evelyn Grace wasn't 74. She was timeless. You wouldn't expect a 74-year-old woman to stop traffic, but Evelyn Grace did. She wasn't movie star famous, nor did she chase attention. Yet everywhere she went, heads turned. There was something about her, something luminous and alive. The way she walked with her shoulders back, her laughter unapologetically loud, her gaze steady and warm. It wasn't youth that made her magnetic. It was power. The kind that comes when a woman has lived long enough to stop asking for permission. When I first met her, she was ordering coffee at a seaside cafe, dressed in a long white dress that danced in the breeze. Her silver hair shimmered under the sunlight, like moonlight caught in motion. She glanced at me and smiled, not politely but knowingly, like she'd seen that startled look before. "You're wondering how I do it," she said, half joking, half serious. I nodded, and she leaned in closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a sacred secret. "You want to know why I'm hotter now than I ever was at 25? That question became the beginning of a story that would change how I saw aging forever. Evelyn wasn't always radiant. In fact, she told me there was a time when she felt invisible. After her husband passed, after her children had built lives of their own, after the mirror stopped showing the woman she used to recognize. She described it like watching herself fade from her own story, slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing. She had spent years giving, her love, her care, her energy, until there was nothing left that felt like her. She followed routines, filled silence with television, and wore clothes that hid her body because it was easier than seeing how time had changed it. "I thought my best years were behind me," she said, and then one day I just got tired of believing that. It began small. She started taking evening walks again, at first to pass time, then because she liked the way the sunset made her skin glow. She began dressing up even if no one was coming over. She looked at herself in the mirror not to critique but to remember. And she whispered something that became her morning ritual. "You're still here. You're still beautiful." But real transformation, she said, didn't come from the outside. It came from permission. Permission to feel alive again. One afternoon she joined a dance class for seniors. She expected it to be dull, predictable, old songs, slow steps. Instead, she found herself in a room full of people laughing, sweating, moving with abandon. The instructor, a man in his 50s with a contagious energy, told them, "Your body remembers joy even when your mind forgets." That night, Evelyn came home and cried, not out of sadness but because she realized how long it had been since she let herself feel. She began painting again, cooking with spices that filled her kitchen with life, wearing perfume even when she was alone. Slowly, she stopped measuring her worth by youth and started measuring it by vitality. "I wasn't chasing youth anymore," she told me. "I was chasing me." By 70, she had reinvented herself entirely. She began traveling, alone at first, which terrified her. But fear became her compass. Italy, Greece, Morocco, each place peeled away another layer of who she thought she had to be. People noticed her glow everywhere she went. A stranger once asked her secret, expecting her to name a product. Evelyn laughed and said, "I fell in love with myself at 70. Then came the twist, the part of her story that made me lean closer. At 72, Evelyn met someone, a writer named Daniel. He was 60, charming but quiet, and he adored the way she spoke, every word deliberate, every story rich with life. They met in a bookstore, reaching for the same poetry book. "I thought I was past romance," she said, smiling. "But love doesn't care about your age, it cares about your readiness." Daniel didn't see wrinkles, he saw wisdom. He didn't compliment her youth, he admired her presence. Their connection wasn't built on need but on recognition. "He saw me," she said softly. "Not the mother, not the widow, not the polite woman I had been pretending to be, me." For the first time in decades, Evelyn allowed herself to be desired, to be vulnerable, to receive affection without guilt. It wasn't about being young again, it was about remembering she was still alive. They traveled together, danced barefoot under moonlight, made love without apology. "You can't imagine," she said, "how freeing it is to be wanted for your spirit, not your smoothness." But the real transformation wasn't in being loved. It was in realizing she didn't need love to feel whole. It was in owning her body, her choices, her story. By 74, Evelyn radiated a confidence that came from full acceptance. She became that woman in the cafe, the one who made people question everything they thought they knew about aging. She looked at me across the table, eyes glimmering with playful wisdom. "Everyone thinks being 74 is the end," she said. "But darling, it's just the sequel, the part where you finally know who you are and stop pretending otherwise." She took a sip of her coffee and grinned. "You know what's funny? The younger women ask me how to stay young. I tell them the truth. They just don't believe it." I asked her what that truth was. She smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made her look ageless. "Stop fighting time," she said. "It's not your enemy, it's your sculptor. Let it carve you into who you're meant to become." And as she walked away, graceful as the tide, I realized she wasn't just hotter at 74, she was freer, wiser, more alive than anyone I'd ever met. Because Evelyn Grace hadn't discovered a secret to youth. She had discovered the secret to living. The first thing you'd notice about her wasn't her age, it was her energy. Evelyn Grace walked into a room like sunlight breaking through a dusty window. You could feel her presence before you even saw her. Her laughter lingered in the air, her confidence filled the silence, and her eyes carried the kind of calm you only earn after surviving life and choosing joy anyway. People stared, not because she was 74 and radiant, but because she had the kind of glow that couldn't be bottled or bought. It was earned. I met her at a small art gallery near the pier. She was wearing a crimson dress, bold against her silver hair. She leaned over a painting, a swirl of colors, fierce and alive, and said softly, "It's not about age, it's about fire." When she turned to me, she smiled with a secret that only experience can teach. That was the beginning of a conversation I'll never forget, the beginning of a story about how one woman became hotter than ever, at 74. She hadn't always burned this brightly. There was a time, she said, when she lived quietly in the background of her own life. After her husband passed away and her children moved away, the house grew still. Too still. Her days were filled with routines that no longer had meaning. Coffee at 7, gardening at 9, TV at 6. It was a rhythm without a heartbeat. "I used to look in the mirror and not recognize myself," she told me. "It wasn't just the wrinkles, it was the emptiness behind my own eyes. I had spent my whole life being everything for everyone else, a wife, a mother, a caregiver. And when they no longer needed me, I didn't know who I was." Then, one morning, something changed. She was sitting in the garden, surrounded by her late husband's roses, when she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd done something that made her feel alive. She looked at her hands, rough and tired, and thought, "I've spent my life nurturing everything but myself. That thought became the spark that started her transformation. She began with something small, buying herself a red dress. "It sounds silly," she laughed, "but I hadn't worn red in 30 years. I told myself red was for the young. But that day, I put it on and looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I saw a woman again, not just a caretaker." That moment awakened something deep inside her. She started taking long walks by the sea, joined a painting class, even signed up for dance lessons. At first, she was awkward and self-conscious. But then, one night, as music filled the studio, she let herself move freely. She stopped worrying about looking graceful and just felt. "I cried when the song ended," she said, "because for the first time in decades, I remembered what it was like to feel beautiful from the inside out." As the months passed, Evelyn's confidence began to bloom. Her silver hair, once hidden beneath dye, became her crown. Her laughter returned, her posture straightened, and her eyes sparkled with mischief. People noticed, of course. They always do when someone reclaims themselves. She smiled when she told me about the first time a younger man flirted with her. "I thought he was being polite," she said. "Then I realized he meant it. That's when I understood something. I wasn't invisible. I had just stopped seeing myself." At 70, she made another bold move. She started traveling alone. Her first trip was to Greece. She didn't speak the language, didn't know anyone, but she went anyway. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but every morning I woke up and thought, I'm still here. I still have time." She hiked cliffs overlooking the Aegean, swam in turquoise water, danced with strangers in the street. "Everyone thinks youth is a number," she said. "But youth is an emotion. It's what happens when you stop waiting for permission to live." At 72, Evelyn met someone new. His name was James, a retired architect with kind eyes and a love for jazz. They met at a local photography class, both pretending to understand the settings on their cameras. "He made me laugh," she said, her eyes softening, "not because he was trying to impress me, but because he reminded me that joy is ageless." Their relationship wasn't about filling a void. It was about sharing the light they'd each found within themselves. They traveled, painted, and danced together. "He told me once," she said with a shy smile, "You don't look 74, you look alive." And that, she paused, was the greatest compliment I'd ever been given. When I asked her what her secret was, how she stayed so radiant, so full of life, she laughed. "Everyone wants a shortcut," she said. "A cream, a diet, a trick. But there's only one secret worth knowing." She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have to fall in love with yourself, over and over again, no matter what the mirror says." She told me she dances every morning before breakfast. She paints when she can't find words. She forgives herself often. She eats chocolate when she wants to. "And I never, ever apologize for taking up space," she added with a wink. Then she stood, smoothed her red dress, and said, "At 74, I've finally learned that beauty isn't about being young. It's about being free. When you live with passion, it shows on your face, in your walk, in your eyes. That's why I'm hotter than ever, because I stopped trying to be perfect and started being real." She looked toward the sea, her hair glowing silver in the sunlight. "You know," she said, "everyone spends their life running from age. But what if aging isn't something to escape? What if it's the grand finale, the part where you finally get it right?" And as she walked away, graceful and unhurried, I understood. Evelyn Grace wasn't a miracle of genetics or luck. She was a woman who had chosen to live, fully, fearlessly, and without apology. That was her secret. That was her fire. That was what made her hotter than ever at 74.